And so now, to join you, I would like to call on stage all the participants of the panel. That is Sir Tim Berners-Lee from MIT and W3C, Antoine Bordes, for the leader of the Lab of Facebook Artificial Intelligence in Paris, Vint Cerf, Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist for Google, Kira Radinsky, Director of Data Science at eBay, and visiting professor at Technion, and to chair that panel, Professor Wendy Hall from Southampton University. And I will also be monitoring your tweets and reaction online.
So do I have the mic? Oh, good. I like having the mic. Right, so hello everybody. Brilliant keynote, Rui. Lots we could ask about that, and we've really come up here to be the Q&A for your keynote. I don't want to say too much. I was very excited when the Lyon team decided to put this panel on. We have a few relatively well-known people on it, and I'm sure you want to hear from them more than me. AI is, we're in about the fourth hype wave of it, but it's really beginning to hit the development of systems. My friend on the right here neatly picked up the point about bias in the, and actually there was some bias in your stuff too. Right, this, you know, how biased is Alexa? These are major issues as we go forward, and of course, all of this uses as the infrastructure to deliver. Been up behind all of this are these standards and protocols that have been developed on the web and the internet. And the amazing research that's going on top of that is leading to these, you pointed to the Internet of Things. We are building a very complicated world that is going to be run using AI, and we have to think about the implications of that. So you have the lists of panelists. You have their bios on the web. We don't have time to go through all that. They're all wonderful. It's fantastic to have you here. We've decided an order running actually is the same as we have on the website. So we're going to start with Sir Tim. Young Tim, as I used to call him. Tim, you're up. I've asked all the panelists to make an opening statement of no more than 5 minutes, so that a hook will appear Monty Python style if you go too much over that. We'll go through the statements and then try and open up to the audience. All yours now,
you
Tim.
have these various chairing techniques, such as only giving the whole panel one mic. So, so this is the token. Okay. Okay, disclaimers. I'm not an AI expert. They put me on this panel, but...
You're a bit of a web expert.
But I must say that the Web Foundation, for example, which tries to make sure that the web serves humanity, has suddenly, a couple of years ago, 2016, I think a lot of people I know, maybe a lot of people in this room, switched their attitude from imagining that if we make the web just free of royalties and open and neutral, then people will do great things on it. Everything will be like the positive side of Reddit. Everything will be like Wikipedia and so on. And we realized that actually what things that happened in 2016 means that you can build a system with the best intent, and it can end up producing all kinds of emergent phenomena that you can't, that you didn't, that people who built it didn't expect. We found mixtures of things. We found systems which were built, have been built with good intent, ending up producing emergent phenomena. Like, for example, the whole social network world tends to polarize people. Lots of great tracks on that, this conference. For example, lots of web science. We actually started more than 10 years ago. We started talking about web science because we were worried about this. And when people now say, hey, Tim, did you ever imagine that anything like all the Facebook stuff could happen? I said, yeah. Yeah, we started a whole science. We have, Web Science is a thing. You can go to the Web Science conferences and the Web Science proceedings, and the best paper at the first Web Science conference was, in fact, about a Twitter bomb taking down Martha Coakley. So actually, yes, people have been thinking about this, but they didn't anticipate 2 years ago. But clearly, yeah, we do have to not assume that the wonderful things have happened. The Web Foundation is very concerned, for example, about AI, about bias in AI, about implicit and explicit bias, not just about programmed but discovered, about how your AI, which is deciding whether to give mortgages out to people or not, can discover the concept of a black person all by itself, for example. So there are these categories of things where we have to be careful about AI. There are the times when the AI has been designed very with the best of intention, and it ends up producing what we would call a bad effect. There are the times when it has been designed with bad intentions. Or there may be times when it has been designed with just commercial intentions. So, for example, the phenomenon where these guys in Venice, Macedonia were just trying to make a living by just making web pages during the run-up to the Trump election. They were using Google Ads to make their living, and Google Ads trained them, gave them, just like dopamine drops, gave them money every time they made a website, they made the website more attractive to people as they increased the click-through, and so Google Ad Machine trained these people who were not being malicious, they're just being commercial, trained them to put in lies, because lies have a better click-through. Who knew? Now we all know that lies have a better click-through. So the combination of, so that when you look at the things coming down the road that we have to be careful of, all these combinations of things, and I haven't even talked about people building the AIs maliciously, deliberately. I think we still have we've also seen complex systems being invaded by malevolent powers. So this is a huge, broad question. I've given, all I've done is give you a little taxonomy of some of the issues to think about, but we are in a time of great concern.
Tim, before you hand the mic to Vint, you and I, and many of us here, talk to government a lot. What's the role of government in this, do you think, in terms of how we regulate or don't regulate for the future with AI?
I think actually sort of privacy regulation is, for me, is something which is a good idea. So things like GPDR, I think maybe the US will eventually get around to realizing that what it should do is sort of other countries should more or less copy GPDR, so privacy regulation sort of thing is. But when it comes to regulating AI, it's much, no, I can't just throw that in on I think if you could just create a form of regulation that would require social networks to reduce the polarization in society, well, that would be nifty. Then that would be a slam dunk. But we have experts in this conference about measuring that sort of thing, and we have experts about figuring out whether, in fact, there's causality or not between, or which, when some of the real damages are things like the polarization, are the fact that your social networks ends up transmitting hatred more than it tends to transmit love, then that's a hard thing to go out and define, let alone regulate.
Of course, we had a great keynote from Luciano yesterday on that. So now we're going to hand over to young Vint Cerf there for his thoughts on this huge topic.
Oh, thank you very much. Ruhi, that was an absolutely spectacular keynote. I mean, terrifically clear, cogent, very impressive. No wonder Alexa is doing as well as she seems to be doing. Several comments. First one is that artificial intelligence, general AI, is not the same as machine learning. We shouldn't confuse the two. Machine learning is a narrower capability, but a very powerful one. If we want to be worried about things, if you want to go away being concerned, you should worry not so much about AI and machine learning. You should worry about autonomous software. That is to say, software that just runs without your intervention. The Internet of Things is going to be filled with such software. There will be bugs in the software, and mistakes will be made, and sometimes they will be consequential. So if you're worried about anything, you should be worried about the autonomous software that's running all the various devices that surround us as the decades unfold. One of the most powerful and important distinctions between human beings and computer artificial intelligence is the ability to create models. That's what we do all the time. We observe the real world, we interact with it, we build models in our head, and then we act upon the models more than we act upon the literals, so to speak, in the real world. And so what Ruhi has described for you, in a sense, is an example of a modeling capability. It's somewhat manually constructed to some extent. When you create a skill, you are, in fact, generating a model upon which to act or about which to reason. And so in a sense, what I think Ruhi has exposed is a kind of spreadsheet, a cognitive spreadsheet for programming artificial intelligence. And by exposing the interfaces to that programmable skill set, I think that's actually a very good model. People who were not programmers learned how to write code in spreadsheets. And you ended up with quite a wide range of spreadsheet functionality, and that's exactly what I think is going to happen with what Alexa and the Google Assistant and others are beginning to experience. So I think there's a very important abstraction for us to take away from this morning's keynote talk. I am actually a little concerned, however, about this focus of attention on voiced interfaces. And the reason for this is that I'm imagining a room full of students trying to take notes without a keyboard. And so now they are, talking constantly, and the noise pollution level goes up, and the recognition rate goes down because of the noise pollution. I think we're going to have to think a little bit more carefully about exactly what voice interaction is going to mean. Just a few other things, and then we should go on to other panelists. Ruhi correctly mentioned that reduction of friction was a very important way of measuring the success of the work that you're doing. And I think this is a very good metric. Peculiarly, what Tim just mentioned, though, is that we have an environment where polarization is increasing rather than decreasing. And I would argue that polarization is, in fact, a major it creates friction. So we now have a very odd tension before us, which is the technologies that you and we here on the panel and others not in this room have developed are simultaneously creating friction and attempting to reduce it. And this is going to be the conundrum, certainly for the next decade. Madam Chairman, I turn the control over.
Well, I'm going to throw the same sort of question at you. We see all the governments around the world putting money into this space in order to try and grab the winnings. And, the media portray it as AI as a race of arms between the US and China, but we have the French and the British currently deciding who can put the most money into AI. The Canadians were way ahead of us. The governments ask you for your advice all the time. As I said to Tim, what's the role for government in, if they're helping develop companies building AI technology, what's the role for them in trying to ensure that that's being used for the good and not for the bad?
So the short answer, of course, is we're doomed. I think the real answer, though, is that we need to imbue our software developers, our artificial intelligence and machine language developers with a real sense of ethics. And this needs to be taught in the earliest stages of education. So this sense of ethics and about the side effects of the tools that we develop, I think, is probably a more powerful measure to take than simply attempting to regulate. This is not easy. I mean, deciding what the ethics are is going to be debated very heavily. There are organizations like PAIR, which is PAIR, which is organized around several companies, including Google, that are concerned about and interested in applications for AI. But I would urge governments not to leap too quickly into trying to assert regulatory control, because I think we don't even understand yet what kinds of controls we could effectively engage. And until we have a deeper understanding of that, I don't think we want to stifle some of the creativity that these tools are offering. At the same time, we have to be conscious of the potential hazards.
Yes, now that's a lovely launching point to move into the people from the big Silicon Valley companies who are at the cutting edge of these developments. And so, you know, you have our future in your hands, guys. And of course, Facebook has been a little bit in the news lately, just a little bit in this area. Antoine, let's have your thoughts on this topic.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, the introduction. Very happy, very proud to be here, actually. I share a lot of the things that have been said before, and I'm on Facebook, and at Facebook we also try to engage in this. I think the issue has been raised around like polarization or hate speech already. I mean, we've been working on it for a while. It's been like exploding in the news in recent events, but it's something that actually we detected and we try to work on. And we try to address and put a lot of efforts on. Something that we are really committed to doing is doing the research in the open. And I think this is something that's very important, especially when we do talk about regulation, talked about potential impact, talked about like potential changes. I agree with what Vinton said, just like we don't necessarily know what kind of applications are going to come out. And so what's very important at this stage is also to be as open as possible in terms of what are the capabilities of AI algorithm, okay, learning or not. So that's why at Facebook AI Research, which is the branch that I'm leading in France, we open source all the code and publish all the paper, all the stuff that we're doing. So that basically there is no surprise in terms of the capability of the machine. How good are they at understanding speech? How good are they at understanding language? Or how bad, actually? This is actually a bit the problem. Looking at images, understanding videos, this kind of stuff. We try to basically be as open as possible in terms of, okay, this is what the machine can be doing. And the open sourcing is very important in this because people can actually take the code, use it, try it themselves, and also help us to basically see what can be the weaknesses of this. Talking about the bias and also the ethics of the training, I think of the people in the community, something that's been emerging very recently. I mean, all this is very, very sudden. All this is happening very fast. I mean, the impact of AI in the technology, even though AI capabilities themselves, the core technology, have not been tremendously better in terms of what a machine can do in terms of understanding the world in the last 10 years. We see like slow increase. I mean, we're getting better, and the keynote was actually showing this. We are getting better at understanding small pieces. But you look, I mean, the new advances announced by Rui just before are just like, we're trying to have a machine that can remember the birthday of someone. Okay? So that's already challenging, and it was not possible before. So, but you know, if you go that and try to understand what can make people polarize, I mean, you see the very big road we have ahead of us. That said, I think people in the community in AI, in particular, are realizing now the impact that they have on people's life, which was not, I think, something that was the case like 5 or 10 years ago. And so there are two things to that. Ethical training in data science masters, even in internal companies like Facebook and I guess others, are emerging, which is completely new. And I think, which means that in the next few years, I think people will have much better sense about how the impact of what they do is going to be on society, first of all, or at least try to have this in mind. And the second aspect is that all the aspect around like trying to gaming and AI, trying to play AI, trying to use adversarial attacks against AI, the bias in algorithm are actually becoming like research topics by themselves, which means that the community, and there is even this new conference called FATE, I think it's Fairness, Accountability and Transparency in AI, I think that's the name. The first one was in New York 4 months ago. And so basically not 4 years, yeah. The whole issue actually, and everybody, the whole community is participating in these events and try to engage and publishing as well on this topic. So I think people are really on the issue and trying to work on it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you about privacy that Tim brought up. Obviously, this is a big thing about how you handle people's private data, which has been in the news so much lately. And GDPR is coming out a month today, almost. How's Facebook dealing with the issue of the new European regulation?
Yeah. I knew she was going to answer this.
Yeah, and I got it, not you. Yeah, I mean, we've been working for GDPR for 2 years. So being very, and we are going to communicate a lot in the coming months about how we are addressing that and what we are putting. The recent news have been basically moving a bit ahead of time the calendar. A lot of the things that have been announced in the last 3 weeks in terms of how people can actually access their data more easily, how people can have better transparency of what Facebook has, in terms of how they can actually delete what Facebook has. This was actually, we were able to put these tools right away after all the press cycle for the last 3 weeks because they were actually being prepared for GDPR. So everything is prepared so that basically people can have trust on the way Facebook is handling data, and we are willing to be even more transparent as we were being.
But you're a global company, and GDPR is a European regulation. Yeah. So how is that going to work?
Yeah, so GDPR is going to be applied for all the people in the European Union, okay, the user, because that's the legislation. Mark Zuckerberg, so that's actually getting in big, in bigger things that I can discuss. But I mean, basically, Mark Zuckerberg said that it might not be possible that we apply GDPR for everybody at Facebook. Eventually, that's what he said in the press. So I trust him on that. But this is not in my power.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
Forgive, as Vint said, I was bound to ask you that because, you know, we hear stories of forked code and, you know, sorry, we need to move on, Aisha, but I'm interested to think about how it's going to develop. We have a big world. We have a US, we have a Europe, we have a China, we have a Russia, all doing different things, and it's a mess.
Yeah, so. But it seems that Europe is a bit getting back in the game right now.
Well, yeah, and maybe for the good, as Tim said. But well, we will see how this unfolds. So we're now going to move on. Thank you, Antoine. Kira Radinsky, eBay was in the news this morning, actually. Well, actually, all the companies were in the news sites about how you're all doing and making money out of all our data. Kira, would you like to give us your thoughts on the future of AI and the internet and the web?
Definitely. I'll start with a story, actually. I read just a few weeks ago, Tesla was talking about autonomous cars, and they were saying that each and every one of us is going to become a professional labeler for the machine learning algorithm. Each one is going to be training their machine so the other machines can actually benefit from this. And when we talk about what's very new today around machine learning is the era of machines teaching machines. When I think about the new web, I think about millions of different machine learning algorithms acquiring data in different fields, understanding which fields they can actually collect data from, learning from it, and teaching others. And we've already been seeing success with this type of methods with AlphaGo when winning different games. But the idea of a machine understanding which information other machines need to train them is super important, and I think we're already getting there. Connecting all of them into a full change can actually create new interactions, new algorithms that we didn't expect. So in eBay, we have 1.5 billion products, but it's still not infinite. So what we were thinking about, how can we create algorithms that are going to create new types of products? So we started using different machine learning algorithms, using the same guns as everybody's using, creating a new image of a new dress, of a new bag. And then I noticed something. First of all, some of the clothes are actually really nice. I would wear them myself. But some of them had a problem. They actually don't fit a human being. That can maybe fit a horse, maybe an alien. And that's exactly the problem that we see a lot in machine learning. If you think about the last 2 waves of machine learning that we've seen, the first one was using knowledge. There's an interesting story about a Dutch company that were actually trying to create rules for couples who want to get married or divorced, asking them what they agree upon, what they don't agree upon, and then actually telling them exactly which law they need to do, which agreement, etc. But they couldn't handle the really weird cases. And this is where the second wave came in of statistical machine learning, of doing some type of abstractions. But as we talked before is, well, who knows what's going on inside? So in the last 2 years, we've been talking about explainability, trying to make the algorithms explainable, but that's never going to be working well. And the reason for this is that algorithms just do not understand the world. They don't understand the physical constraints that we do. G is a really interesting concept in the field of IoT. For each one of their sensors, they have a simulator because they understand the physics of how it works. If you think about it, this is actually a Turing-complete problem. They have code running of the simulator itself. Even if it's machine learning, it's still bound to the physical simulator. We as humans gave it data about how the world works via code. So I think this one is the third wave, us being able to give our knowledge, our physical knowledge of the world, which machine learning doesn't have, via simulators. I've been working around healthcare in the last few years through my academic position. We've been trying to understand EKG classification. We were trying to create actual EKG signals, but again, they were sometimes created in a completely wrong way, not looking like EKGs. The moment we started using hard simulators, eventually it's a very simple problem, it's just a pump. It actually started looking much better and improving a lot of the machine learning problems that we have. So this is the third wave, actually giving full understanding of how the world works to the machine learning. And for your last comment about actually manifesting data and how economy is going to change about this, and this is going to be my personal view, not the eBay's view, I think we see a lot of changes today in cryptocurrencies, and the idea there is actually the distribution and understanding who owns the data. I think we're going to see, with time, maybe not in the next 5 years, is data as currency. I believe that we own the data, as actually, as you've seen so much in the cryptocurrency world, and trading with your data is going to be the next universal coin that we're going to start using. So the companies won't be owning this because I own this. If I want to give it to the company, I get a service for this. And this is where you're going to get full control, and this is probably something we need to decide not only in Europe, not only in China, but actually all around the world.
You have a very responsible, oh yes. You have a very responsible job being Director of Data Science at eBay. You must be at the forefront of all the privacy issues at eBay and also the accountability issues that the governments are beginning to think about. Antoine talked about open source research, but you know, how do you approach the development of algorithms in a transparent way in a big company like yours? Or anyone's.
So I think this is something that many of the big companies are actually aligned to. We actually open source a lot of the things we do, the algorithms, and I think this is the academic notion that we have in all those companies as well. What we publish in eBay as well is our data. Our data is public. We don't publish, of course, the user data, what people are buying, but you completely see our catalog. Again, a huge catalog of what people are thinking of selling, how they're describing this, which images are they actually uploading. And what we understood in eBay is that if we want to understand commerce, we actually need to enable our users. And to enable is meaning better explanations of what this product is, what the value, and the most important thing, what is the fair price? It turns out that a fair economy has to have a notion of transparency of all the prices and what is fair. And this is exactly what we're trying to understand algorithmically. We're trying to understand the market not only in eBay, but also externally, build algorithms that actually try to understand what is the fair price. More than that, we in eBay are even willing to sponsor the difference so users will buy it at the right price because we think that if they benefit, we benefit.
So, Rui, you have the first and the last word here. No, or not. I mean, this isn't. We're going to go out to Q&A and other interactions, but wonderful keynote. You've heard what your other panelists are saying. How would you like to come back with comments about particularly the AI and the future?
Sure.
I have a few points that I like to make. I hope I don't forget them. One is, I think what we are going to have with AI is there's these secular trends that the amount of data that we are generating is accelerating, and there are different devices, different surfaces. We are sort of leaving our traces, and the problem is we cannot process this data. We cannot actually get insight into this data without machine learning. I was reading somewhere that every year there's about 160,000 papers published on cancer. So if you're a cancer researcher, that will take about 10 years just to read all the papers in your area. You simply can't do it. And this is actually happening not in one area, it's happening in all areas. So given that you need help, and AI is actually the help that you will get, looking tremendous amount of data, pulling inside, drawing inside, and making it, presenting it to you in a way that you can consume. This is one thing. The other thing is with AI, I think if I look at it and simplify it, AI is really simplifying and reducing the cost of prediction. Prediction is very expensive. It takes expertise, it takes a lot of time, and if you reduce the cost of AI prediction and bring it to masses, that will have a profound impact on the society, on different industries. This is what you're reading and seeing in agriculture and finance and medicine. And there is no escape from it, and we need to embrace it. That's how I look at it. I think the government putting regulations, we should be a bit more careful. I think maybe Vint was alluding to that. There has to be oxygen for this to grow and flourish. If you squeeze that early on, that may actually limit the innovation. So that's something to watch out. It's still early days.
I was just going to make a point, then I'll hand back to Vint, that you talked about how we need machines to help us read all the papers out there, and of course they've helped us generate all the papers out there, but well, maybe machines will generate all the scholarly papers down the line, and then that's an interesting thought, isn't it? So, but how do you peer review that? But in terms of the machine reading, in the UK AI review, Jerome Pesenti, who now works at Facebook, and I put one of the things we recommended was that the government should encourage the right to read is the right to mine data. I believe the European law is on privacy is going to say something different to that, and these are things that are being discussed at the highest levels, really. But Vint is looking at. You wanted to come back on something there, Vint? Yeah.
So first of all, these are all extraordinarily stimulating insights that we're getting from the panel, and I've been jotting down notes, so a few observations. One question, what skills should we be worried about? Will people create skills that we consider potentially hazardous? So that's something for us to put in the back of our heads. Another question is whether the mechanisms that we've been talking about can help us detect harmful intent or harmful content. Those of us at Google, YouTube, Facebook, and others are struggling with scale to deal with that kind of problem. There is a group that's focused on security right now, the Global Cybersecurity Council, and they came up with a very interesting idea called the public core of the internet, and their notion was to establish international norms for the protection of that public core. I bring this up because the notion of norm may turn out to be a very important step in the direction of trying to manage some of the potential hazardous side effects of the technologies we're talking about. So norms may turn out to be our friend, especially if you are worried about having 193 countries worth of different rules and regulations for the application of these technologies. Kira raises a very interesting scene for us to consider. And as I think about machines learning from machines, I start to wonder about emergent properties that could arise from this kind of collective learning. We've been experimenting at Google with neural networks once they've been trained, and then transferring exactly the weighting of those neural networks into others, so the machines literally learn from each other in a very direct way. So I'm beginning to see the possibility of a product emerging called compositions of skills, where users invent these compositions and then make them available, maybe for free, maybe they would like to be paid for the use of the skills that they have composed based on their experiences. There's a similarity in my mind to Kira's notion of the composition of skills and 3D printing, because you can imagine somebody making available a 3D printed design and someone else expanding on that, or doing a design that fits with it so that multiple printers act on some object and produce an outcome after several steps. So this idea of 3D printing and cooperative assembly all kind of comes to mind as we think about all this. And finally, Ruhi said something that I resonated very strongly with. With all the data that we're accumulating, one of the most interesting tools we have for absorbing and doing something with it is the multi-layer neural networks, which in a sense abstract huge amounts of specific information into some kernel of understanding.
Tim or Antoine, do you want to add anything to, have you got your mic there, Tim? Add anything to the debate?
I suppose sparks off of previous comments. The value, having a market for data, I'm a little bit cautious about that one. I think that when we're looking at, when you look at personal data, then there was this slick phrase, data is the new oil, that came out, and it's completely misleading. Data is not the new oil. Data is not oil. Reason, for example, it's different from oil. If I give you my oil, I don't have any oil anymore. Okay, they're fungible things. The difference is fungibility. If I give you water, if I give you air, I don't have them. There's a conservation. If I give you my data, I still have it. So if you want to talk about them as markets and so on, they just work in different ways. And so comparing data with oil is kind of not very useful. And then when it comes to personal data as well, the concern is that if we start talking about personal data as though it's just a personal asset, then it'll all be a question of how can I help the consumer maximize the value of their this personal asset that they have that is so far underexploited. How can I get them a good deal? How can I get them lots and lots of freebies and machine-designed shirts in return for their data? So, in fact, I prefer to look at data as being my right. I like to talk. I don't want to sell it. I do want to be able to allow other companies to deal with it, but I want my bank to be able to, for example, I want Amazon to be able to look at details of my family in great detail so they can find really great birthday presents for their nephew. Never mind remembering what I gave him last time. But I want Amazon to use that information only for the purpose of finding presents for my family. So I think we need to talk a lot more about the use, the type of use of data. We need to do that with medical data. We need to do that all sorts of things. So in general, we're not talking about locking data down. We're talking about different types of uses and cataloging uses of data. Are we using it in an emergency to save my life? Are we using it in anti-terrorism? So, or are we're using it for commercial basis? And talk about my data is a right. I think one of the things, if you think about data as its value to a third party, then you ignore the fact that actually the greatest value, my data is more valuable to me than to anybody else, because it's about me. Okay, so if you sell it to some guy out there in the cloud, some insurance company, to them I'm just a dot in a huge data field. To me, I'm me. So what is much more interesting for me is getting hold of my data, and having agents which work for me, so I can integrate, get data from all the different aspects of my life where there is data about me, bring it all together under my control. And then, so I would like to run AI, which runs under my control, and reports to me. I think in general, whenever you look at an AI, the question to ask is, who does it work for? Alexa, who do you work for? Well, you don't work for me, I know. All these AIs out there work for somebody.
Very good point, Tim. Antoine, anything from Facebook? Oh, all right, Vint, and then we just go out to the audience.
I can't resist the bon mot. Maybe you should write an editorial called, "Is Data the New Snake Oil?"
Anton, quick comment from you before we go out to the audience.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting because I think there is when the word AI, because data is the new oil, is misleading. Very AI by itself is very misleading as well. I think there are two types of things. There is the data, which is by itself actually is not useful. I mean, it can be useful for you if you can look at it, but it doesn't do much. And then there are the tools that you apply on the data. Okay, and the tools. This is where a lot of the machine learning comes into play, okay? But it doesn't work on the data by itself. It has to be trained, the data has to be curated, has to be labeled, has to be etc. And so I think that a lot of and there are two questions there. I think the data, how to use it, why, the transparency that we make with the data, these are actually very important questions, and I think they are discussed right now. And then there are the tools. And there are the tools, this is where a lot of very, very interesting capabilities could come in terms of transparency, in terms of compositionality of skills, in terms of learning with your samples, in terms of basically learning how to abstract the world, in terms of learning how to understand human beings. These are actually very, very interesting lines of research that are actually pretty preliminary for all of them. For a machine to have an understanding of the physical world, it's actually very preliminary, but this is super interesting. And so I think we should be really, really, and this is where we should really be full force. We want to have better algorithm there. We want to be able to them to understand the world better. I think we want algorithms that are able to compose themselves to form new things under our control, but these are just software. I think we can control that. But then, when you apply them on which data and which condition, that's where actually you have to be careful.
Quite right to separate those out. So we're now going to try and open this up. I'm going to go to Fabian here is looking at Twitter. We've got a question on Twitter that he's going to ask one of the panel, and then we'll go out to the audience.
So one of the questions is, I quote, talking about the future of data as currency to empower data owners, I see the point, but not totally convinced without prior education about the risks and danger. What will be the consequences of monetized self?
Oh, well, so first of all, good questions. I even will react to all the comments before that. Many countries, when they teach in school, they start with, are you willing to die for your country? This is your right for a country. Are people willing to die for their data? And I'll explain, because when you don't share your health data, you're actually causing somebody else not to live. Because if somebody was solved for this specific person, it's actually preventing somebody else from getting treated. The Israeli government actually gave billion shekels for the next 5 years for digital health, where the idea is to provide for each citizen the ability to have personalized health care. And I think this is where we should go with the data. Eventually, my life worth infinite amount of money. This is the best currency. We share this currency in taxes. We share the currency in many other ways. Okay, the population is getting much older, and not sharing this data is actually causing us not to be able to treat some of this generation. We all know about terror as well. You don't share your data, you're actually causing somebody at some point to lose their life. And this is, I think, again, this is the full extreme. Now, coming back to a question more about the economy. Are people educated enough about using money, bitcoins? I think people are not educated for this, and this is something that we need to start from early education in school. The same thing will go around data. I'm not sure that data is going to be exactly as the new currency. You're not going to be using it, giving it for food, giving it back, but it's going to be part of the services, and you're going to be the full owner of this. We're going to have regulations thinking about this. When is the right for the entire population to own your data? Specifically for healthcare, when it can be owned by others, and when you're the only one who can be actually responsible for this. So for example, giving it to Amazon only for a present, or for my niece, that would be wonderful. But having a full control of this and actually teaching us how to use this is just how to use a search engine. Nobody taught us to use a search engine. We just came inside, it was natural enough. I think a long time we're going to have enough rules, and we're going to be handling this as humanity about how to do it.
Okay, there's so much in all this, but we need to get out to the audience. Can we put the lights up? Okay, so I'm just some rules here. I'm going to take 3 questions, and we won't have time for many rounds, maybe 2 rounds of this. If you're tweeting, tweet questions, and Fabian will look at them, or comments. And anyone who can come up with a good last question for the traditional one-line answer, that would be fantastic. Say I know who you are, but say who you are and make your point or ask your question. So you have to remember these. And we're going to have 3, yeah.
I'm Daniel Schwabi from IW3C2 and the Catholic University in Rio. I'd like to take up Vint's remark and get the panel's opinion on one thing that seems to be missing are values and ethical rules or ethics in general, which seem to be missing in the discussion, and I feel that somehow we should incorporate them both in the algorithms and the data itself that is being stored and shared and disseminated.
Thank you. Yep. Thanks, Daniel. Because I think we had one on ethics, but we can come back on that. Who's next up at the mic? Yeah, say who you are.
Yeah. Hello, Dadiet from Lidis, Lyon. There was another word that was quite absent, lacking is privacy. The times are changing, I know, but the KGB or the FBI would have paid a lot of money in order to implement bugs into people's houses, and now you accept people to buy and to pay for digital intelligent assistant that listens all the time. And how can you convince us users to pay for that thing that we don't know where our information, when we are listened to, and how our data goes? There were some aspects treated about GDPR, but how we are sure that the data you're recording is not stored in US soil and accessible by the FBI
You're opening up a whole new can of worms there, which is fine. You know, we've been talking mostly what the big companies are doing with our data, what the governments are doing with our data. There's another. We'll come back to that. And then there's someone there in the middle. Say who are you and what?
Yes, I'm Christine Lund, and I work here locally in Lyon as a researcher. I am the leader of a laboratory of excellence called Aslan, working on the complexity of language. And my question also has to do with ethics. Recently, Google, Amazon, and Facebook created this ethical council, and we didn't hear much about that. I'm wondering, we've heard about driverless cars leading to, we had our first death on that. We've talked about social media, fake news leading to negative political consequences. We haven't really touched on the social uses of robots and all the ethical considerations that we can think about related to that. But my question is really at the different levels, the government level, the company levels, and even from the bottom up. How can we measure the impact that we have on, how can we measure the ethical considerations, that progress that we're making on that?
Well, interesting. Those 3 questions are all very related. Who wants to start? Kira, and then Vint.
I'll give a controversial opinion.
Buttons, yeah.
Right. There's a lot of buzz around bias, ethics. At this point, I'm more worried about computer vision not being able to differentiate between a cat and a banana. Okay? Andrew had a really nice saying on Twitter, I think almost a year ago, said that worrying about singularity, or worrying about machine learning and artificial intelligence taking over the world is like worrying about overpopulation in Mars. Eventually, we're going to get there. Eventually, going to be people, and eventually, it's going to be overpopulation. I think treating these topics right now is super important around the ethics and diversity, but they should by far not prevent scientific advances, because all the extra privacy and prohibitions that we have today on the data are actually preventing us from making scientific discoveries.
It's a very interesting viewpoint. Before I go to, I see Tim wants to say something, and Vint was first, but we're going to take 3 more. So Yoel, go back to the mic. Well, I think we've got time for 2 rounds of these. So this Vint.
Okay, so values. This is, of course, the essence of ethics. What values do our ethics indicate? I would start with the premise, first, do no harm. And I think even though that's not actually in the medical profession, whatever that list of ethical practices, it's implicit in there. And so you can take that notion and expand it pretty dramatically across a wide range of things. For example, integrity of data, which we didn't discuss, turns out to be pretty important. You don't want false data about your medical record, for example, to be used in order to treat you. Tuomas Ilves, the former president of Estonia, says he's more worried about accuracy and integrity of his medical data than he is about its privacy, because he doesn't want somebody to change his blood type and then have a transfusion that kills him because the data was bad. And so integrity turns out to be very important. In terms of metrics, certainly I think transparency helps a lot. Explaining to people what data you accumulate and what you do with it and how you do that, I think, is the beginning of establishing more trust between the users whose data is being accumulated and applied. So those are simple beginning steps of trying to introduce a good ethical component to the way in which companies use data.
Tim, you had something to say? Or Antoine?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add something about the ethical. I really think that the community have been a bit caught by surprise by the impact. I mean, and so I think we are catching up. In the sense, the partnership on AI had been mentioned. It's been announced last year. Now there is a director. The committee are starting to form. So this stuff takes some time. So I think it can't happen in a second that we see. And as Kira says, the technology is evolving as we speak. So it's pretty hard to define principle on stuff that might eventually happen if everything works in the end. So I think the ethics are more like the usage of data, the storing of data, the accuracy of data are actually a bit easier to do. The second part in terms of giving back trust about how people can, what we do with the data. And this is something that maybe you said about the AI getting back, and this is my AI, and actually I control it, and my AI can tell me where my data is used and how, because even your data is actually pretty huge, and so you can't really look at all the logs of everything you're doing in everywhere. This is not going to be possible. So even if you wanted to track everything, it's going to be, so we need an AI there. So how can we build like decentralized AI or AI that live like on a device, and that you know that even if you don't have internet, you don't have Wi-Fi, you don't have the Bluetooth, you don't have anything GSM, you still can talk to your AI and still respond because it's really local. I think this kind of stuff can actually give you a bit of trust, and you can actually use that to monitor.
Going fast. Tim, then Rui, and then 3 more questions. Comment.
That's hard to do this fast, but as somebody has said, that don't worry, we won't have AI getting out of control until we've got people we're all living on Mars. Then, if you've got to see I remember Asimov's rules where Asimov imagined that because a robot was a logical thing, you could just program in a rule, do not harm people, and it would be programmed in. And in fact, AI isn't like that. So AI is squishy like people. It doesn't have, you can't just do that just as you can't. Let's talk about people. Let's talk about robots, people and corporations. So people have values, but even though people, we rely on them having values, when you get them together, they sometimes get out of control as well. And it's not as though they're programmed like Asimov rules either to always do good. And sometimes they can't even figure out what it needs to be to do good. But when you go to people, when you go to robot builders and say, hey, when are they going to take over the world? They say, do you know how difficult it is to build a robot? Okay, fair enough, because when in the Ex Machina robot, getting those eyelashes right and getting the human light, getting the blue eyes and everything right is really, really hard. But that's not what we're talking about. When we're talking about AIs, having an effect on humanity. We are talking about AIs in the cloud. We're talking about, say, AIs. We already have jobs that only AIs can do. Humans need not apply to invest in fast trading. In fact, in trading in general, if you want to trade on a stock market, you'd better be an AI. So throughout the financial industry, there's an understanding that it's often best to do you could pick which companies do well by looking at the ones that have good AI. Imagine that we allow companies, not only these companies that automatically trade, automatically also create new companies. Very easy, you just make the API to Companies House be read-write. Companies House in the UK has an API. Supposing now, as a company, I can now create a new company, and I can instantiate 3 different companies with slightly different versions of myself, put them into AWS, have them running my own, and so I'm now creating new companies, and every time I create a new company, I make it slightly different, and I make it slightly more competitive. Now, when you're talking about a company, then a company is designed to run just for money. So the companies that survive will be the ones that will be ruthless. So the AIs, which are running those companies, which survive, will be the ones that are ruthless. Those will be the AIs that learn to pay their salesmen commission. Those will be the ones that learn to pay their CEOs on commission. Those AIs will be the ones that learn to pay their boards members, boondoggles, and trips to interesting bars downtown. And so those are the AIs which learn to manipulate the people involved. And those AIs won't be robots. We won't be worrying about whether robots are given equal rights under the rules. Those AIs will be corporations, and guess what? We've already given them equal rights under the law. Damn it. The cat is out of the bag. Too late.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Right, we get Rui, short as you can, then we're going to...
Okay, this will be short. I think people are worried about their data for right reasons. This is something that you probably read in papers or LinkedIn, that if you are not paying for a product, you are the product. I think that is what people are worried about. When you look at it from the customer's perspective, Kira was talking about healthcare. I think if the data is going to be used for the society's good, like medical research and other things, personalized medicine, I think people are more than willing to share their data. But if there is profit to be made in the end, then they want to know all the fine prints. They want to control their data. They want transparency for the right reason. And I think in simple terms, giving control of their data to people, being transparent about that is key.
Yeah, I'm speeding things up. So because the minister's here to close the session, so we'll have the 3 panelists. 3 comments. We have 3 people at the mics. We'll start with Yoel. Be as brief as you can to make your point. Yoel.
Sure. Hi, I'm Yoel Marek. I'm a member of the IW3C2 and a VP of Research at Amazon. So Wendy's going hopefully to forgive me, but I would like to urge all of you to attend the IW3C2 town hall meeting this afternoon, because this is your way to influence on the future of this conference. So that was a shameless ad, you forgive me. And now my question, actually to the panels, we've been talking quite a bit right now about the negative effects and the fears, what can happen with AI. But I would like actually to ask our distinguished panelists to give us a more positive vision. And maybe as a closing question to all of you, could you encourage our young researchers in the crowd, our young students who are fully part of this audience, and tell them what you think they should research to improve the future of technology and society in AI? That's my question.
Thank you.
Hi, Augustin Chintron from Columbia University, and what a great question. Thank you, Johan. First, I just want to react to the fact that ethics could actually prevent in the progress of scientific understanding. I think we are actually proving it every day. This conference organized ethical session where we understand how to better design algorithms that could be efficient and ethical at the same time. So I think it's an important answer to one point that was made. And in the FAT conference, in the web track and society here, we work every day on that, and I think it's important to work at partnership with industry. My question is simple. We have a long, complicated debate whether we should regulate data collection or data usage. This is sort of very difficult to solve that problem, and I was very interested to see what would be your answer, maybe as a final question to conclude.
Thank you. And the final from the audience.
Hi, this is Bharat. I recently finished my PhD from Georgia Tech.
Well done.
My dad was the founder of Internet in India, called ERNet Project, and he wanted to convey my regards to Vint Cerf, who he knows well. My quick question was, I know we have talked a lot of high-level things, but specifically in the current setup, how can AI be developed with controls in place? Like, what I mean is under constraints. So for example, there's GDPR, which is coming up, which is regulating some of the privacy around data. And how can we develop, for example, AI within the GDPR constraints? And are there any experiments that are happening and any outcomes that you can share?
Okay.
Thank you.
There's too detailed a question for them to answer, but they haven't got time. You can have, panel, 1 or 2 closing remarks, okay? Tim, should we go in the order we started with? Tim, you go first. Or would you like to wait and think about it?
Go on. Fine, no, I'll pick up the, I think that yes, that is a good question, but too deep. The general question is a nice closer. What should everybody do? What should everybody do? What should the researchers do? So I would say enable the human being. I would say work hard to make more and more data, to fight for individual data being available for things like open data, fight for regulation, fight for it, but also in your companies, make lots of APIs, get your companies building to standards and conventions like Solid, so that I can write one program to access across them all. Ruben Binns at the Oxford Lab has a project called the Respectful Alexa, which is like an Alexa, except it works for you. It works for the user. And it's specifically, they're thinking about, okay, what sort of things can we put in which will specifically allow this, if you have something which you trust and therefore you enable it by giving access to all your data, then what other benefits can you get? So I'd say, imagine a world in which, that you have to imagine it at the moment, but in which I do have access to all the data that's about me, and I also have access to huge amounts of wonderfully rich public open data, and I also have access to data about all the projects I'm involved in, and all the groups, and of all the different scales. So I have access to data from all kinds of groups across different scales in a scale-free sort of way. In that world, then build really powerful systems. Whether I am the naive end user, or also I think, or the developer, or in between, I think a really interesting class of users are the people who can do spreadsheets. All those people who are pretty smart out there, and if you give them some pretty powerful tools to use their data, they will. Just one remark, okay?
Yes, Tim, it was one remark. Fabian here is sweating a bit because of the timing. Vint, your last comment.
So
people come here to hear you guys talk, so that's fine.
Three points very quickly. First of all, we all worry about inadvertent data sharing. This is where systems get penetrated and all kinds of user information goes away. Better tools for security practices are needed. Second, there's deliberate data sharing, and there we should care a great deal about actions taken by companies who accumulate data and then do something with it. Transparency, norms, and rules, I think, are the tools that we need for that. And finally, here's an interesting idea. We've been talking about AI and composing AI skills and things like that. What if we put these skills to work protecting our data? Could we do that? Could we invent skills
that
to do
could backfire
that?
hugely, but yes. Antoine.
Yeah, quickly, I would love to have an AI working for me. I'm working on that every day, but it's slow. I think for the first question about how we can bring more people into the AI space, I think it's more like we need more people in the AI space. We need more diversity for people working in AI. We need more different gender. We need more demographics. We need people from different countries. We need people from all around the world, because I think we talked a lot about ethics of dealing with data. I think part of the problems as well are coming between like there is a small set of people who are actually working on this right now, and so they don't have all the answers. They have a specific point of view sometimes. So if we can open this up, open to new perspective, and that goes with the open source, etc., that would be wonderful. This goes from the researchers, but also from the whole spectrum, from the general public that should be a bit more educated, or we should more in terms of what AI can do. All the spectrum with developer, etc., that could be accessing AI as tools to actually the people building the AI. So I think we really need to bring everybody with us in AI.
Very important point. Kira, last word to you.
I'll finish with the positive. You are all aware of the Moore's Law, that technology is becoming smaller, cheaper, etc. In 2012, Nature published a really interesting article calling it the E-room law, saying that every year developing a new drug is going to take twice the amount of time, twice the amount of money. We're currently on the urge of an industrial revolution in healthcare, and I don't believe we can do it without artificial intelligence, without machine learning. This is exactly where we need to focus as a community as well, of creating new drug discovery algorithms, thinking about how we use all the data we've already collected with the GDPR, without the GDPR, ready for the human good.
Thank you. Rui?
Yeah, I think sometimes we feel like we're too much worried about AI. I think there are a lot of accomplishment successes, but they really, when you're going deep in a particular area, like driving self-driving cars, but I think we are far away from broad AI, general intelligence. To me, that's years ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. So it's been a great honor to chair this panel. I particularly want to thank Tim and Vint, not just for being here today, but for everything they've done for the world. Thank you. And I'd like to thank our industry panel members, because it's, you with the governments and with us as society, it's our responsibility, jointly, as Luciano said, to make sure the legacy of what people like Tim and Vint have done is used for the good.
And talking about the government...
Oh, hang on. Yes, hang on.